to being there. It's a real honor to be listed among the group and among Michael Hobbs and Perusings and Steve Sanders.
If your job is simply the task, then your job is probably at risk.
The human there is not using tech as a tool in that case. The tool or the tech is using the human.
Younger generation, like really struggling with certain things, like almost over dependency and stuff. That was one of the criticisms, I think, of one of the prior versions of OpenAI's ChatGPT in particular.
I trying to understand why only one rate cut the rest of next year and buying 40 billion of mortgage-backed securities, this quantitative easing, which is inflationary. Episode 69 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Two uninteresting guys talking about interesting times and maybe breaking down the 6-7 trend that's going around, Jeff. I am a adult with a minor sense of humor, and our episode 69 brings out a smirk. And I was thinking the last couple of weeks, my kids 6 and 9 are actually, that is their ages, are obsessed with this 6-7 trend. And my son's flag football jersey is 67. My 6-year-old wants his jersey to be 67, but couldn't. They just think it's the funniest thing. And I was thinking the last couple of weeks, Jeff, that it's almost like we've given like an adolescent version of kind of the thing that we all joke about and laugh with our episode number 69 here. Sort of silly how it's all come about.
Yes, it really is. And the adolescent version is probably a good thing. It's at least a G or a PG rating as opposed to, something a little more risque than that. I was curious to see if you'd get through the intro with a straight face, and you did relatively well, but also couldn't resist commenting on it. But it does strike me. It's interesting what like silly little things just capture people's imagination or just attention. And like the 6-7 thing, you've heard referenced all in a huge variety of places, from sporting events. You were talking about, I haven't seen this, but from the Vice President of the United States, like joking about it in certain ways. It's just interesting what it is that really like takes hold in a viral nature. I think some of it's the nature of the social media and just like the total interconnectivity that we have with people that allows these trends to really take off. But sometimes I just step back and then wonder why was that the thing that got, just so much attention when, of all of the things out there.
Well, Jeff, if Market Moves has any talent, it is taking all fun out of and killing a cultural phenomenon by overthinking it and overanalyzing. And these kids are like all over this stuff, and it's funny that it's there. If you listen to the original song where this came out of, it's a rap song, as you would imagine, not the greatest lyrics. It's kind of, talking about drug and gun culture and that sort of thing. And even the hands up and down, which is the motion you make when you say 6-7. I don't know if you knew this, but it is. They're even, people are tying it to, I guess in the video, there's actually, it's like guns in hand is sort of the thought that goes along with the lyrics there. But it's also an interesting study, Jeff, in like the like conspiracy culture. So now it's a satanic, reference with 7 being God's number. You may be familiar with that. I wasn't. And then of course 6 is being the opposite. So I don't know. It's a little bit of everywhere. Yeah, whatever. It's funny how much. I mean, my kids cannot hear 6-7 without laughing about it and making some jokes.
Yeah, it really is interesting. I do wonder, Mark, if we need to amend our tagline from 2 uninteresting guys talking about interesting times and making them uninteresting or something by our ability or willingness to like overanalyze, something that really was interesting until we started talking about it.
Despite our ability to kill most joy that's out there through our discussions, Jeff, I did sometimes we'll do this at the end of the podcast, but at the beginning here, just really wanted to thank the listeners for kind of walking through this with us. It's been really good, and there are some quiet times where Jeff and I are just kind of saying, hey, we said we're going to do this, let's do it, let's see where it goes. And we just love the feedback. A friend, Wes, had sent I certainly was not intentional that this became the case, but we were among his top 5 listened podcasts, and they were all the other podcasts were these heavy hitters with millions of views per episode. But we were up there, and I really appreciated that. Probably a statement about him that he wouldn't be too proud of. But I think getting little feedback like that is really helpful and encouraging for you and I to keep moving forward with it.
Yeah, it really is. And we've referenced others in the past as well that have reached out with positive feedback or whatever. I was at an event yesterday, kind of a group of local business owners or whatever. And there's a guy that has a used car dealership, and he does a podcast, kind of similar, I think, to what we do in terms of size and scope and reach or whatever. But he was just asking about how mine was going and talking a little bit about what he's doing with his and whatnot. And at some level, it's a labor of love. At some level, it's a commitment to just doing what you said you would and then seeing where it goes. I think most success stories are very underestimated in how they're told with people just grinding when it didn't make a lot of sense or there just wasn't the traction to get going. And who knows, when we look up, years from now, what this will or won't look like. But it helps to commiserate, I think, with those who are trying to just stick with something to see what it can become in time.
I think in that vein, Jeff, I don't ever think much about what folks could do to help. Listening is sort of all we hope to get out of this. But I think liking, subscribing to the podcast is really helpful on whichever spot you listen to it. And so that's really helpful there. Just trying to reach more people. And I think that's the beautiful thing about this forum, and that we've chosen here, the media that we've chosen here to be able to reach a lot of folks. And we're hoping to do that. It is steadily growing. Really fun to be seeing that. Yeah. I don't know if you have any comments on that, Joe.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I think you and I, by nature, are a little bit contrarian at some level, and I've always kind of liked the fact that every single episode isn't always, begging for please share and like and repost and, make your mom watch it or whatever. It's been kind of fun to just do this because we enjoy doing it and not, for trying to maximize it. But I think it is also a reality that you got to have the reach to be able to, to really justify a longer term project like this. And so I think from time to time, reiterating that, it certainly, makes sense as well, Mark.
Jeff, I think in the spirit of that, it's fun to bring up what a pleasant surprise for you and I. To me, among the 3 nominees for Appraiser Content of the Year, I think is the actual Buzzy Award. Appraisal Buzz puts out, just started this a couple of years ago, I think, has put out a series of awards that they announce at their conference. I am certain that Hal and Jim would be more deserving to be among this group than us, but they have to actually pick the people that are on there, or at least kind of host and distribute. I don't know how names get nominated on this, but however that happened, I think a sincere thank you from both Jeff and I to being there. It's a real honor to be listed among the group and among Michael Hobbs and Perusings and Steve Sanders, who all put out great content and are probably much more deserving of their placement on this sort of finalist list. But I just wanted to say thank you to whoever did that, and thank you to Appraisal Buzz for seeing the work we're doing here. And hey, go vote for us if you're so inclined. We'll put a link to the votes down in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting, Mark. I was listening to to the episode that Jim and Hal did, and no idea. I mean, that there would be that we would be involved there, right? So it was kind of a pleasant surprise, and then obviously, shared it out and whatnot. But we'll just echo the thank you, to those that have listened, that have given us feedback. Certainly to the Appraisal Buzz. The link will be fun for anybody in and around the appraisal space. There are a number of other awards and nominations. I'd encourage everybody to check it out and support the people that are out there, doing great things. There are a number of other awards and nominees they talk about. So this link will take you to all of those. But yeah, just a big thank you. I think that Jim and Hal are definitely more accomplished. Like you said, Mark, you're probably more deserving of something like this, but it would certainly look a little self-serving, I guess, if they created the award and then just handed it to themselves. So I understand, in part the reason for, not doing that. But yeah, a big thank you for us. It's a fun and unexpected recognition on our end for sure.
Yeah, Jeff, I'll make sure to. I've learned from my Hollywood friends that any award show is only interesting if the nominees are intoxicated and react wildly, no matter what happens at it. So I'll make sure to hold up my end of the bargain there.
Well, I do appreciate that. I will load up on chocolate milk, and it'll be a good time for both of us, man.
A roaring good time. A roaring good time. Well, Jeff, a lot to talk about in the marketplace. We had the Fed speak yesterday, which we'll get to. We won't start out the show agenda here with that. I really wanted to talk about an artificial intelligence update. It's been a little bit since we've talked about that with guests over the last month, and if this is a kind of joint curiosity learning experiment together where the listeners are sort of walking with us as we're exploring different topics. And I mean this in all seriousness, that if you only have an hour of listening this week, we will put in the show notes a podcast that I would listen to first. And if you have a second hour, give us a listen for the week. But Gavin Baker is a venture capitalist, Silicon Valley type, and was on the Invest Like the Best, I think, is the podcast. We will have the link in the show notes. But he's been a venture capitalist for a really long time, studying business and market industry around tech. But boy, has about the deepest knowledge of artificial intelligence, where we are, where it's all going, that I've seen in quite some time. He speaks really, really fast than I do, but it's like every sentence is full of depth of knowledge. And I think really, really interesting on a number of fronts. There were a couple of things that I wanted to bring up here, but I did want to emphasize, literally, if you only have an hour this week, just pause this, go down to that link and listen, because it's, if you're interested in kind of the race of kings here in artificial intelligence, the hyperscalers, where the next wave of chips are going, who's going to be winning, and how this sort of reverberates through business one way or another. So Jeff, I know you haven't had a chance to listen to it. I just kind of ran across it yesterday. I won't fault you if you go ahead and leave this podcast and go listen.
Sorry, what was that, Mark? I had tuned you out and I was listening in the background just because I found it more interesting. No, what you say is interesting. I've come across, pretty infrequently podcasts, and just interactions with individuals where you're like, holy crap, that was really good, really insightful. Already knowing I got to listen to that again to really digest more of the stuff that they said. I had kind of a similar experience with an interview that Lex Friedman did with Jeff Bezos a couple of years ago now at this point, but just really insightful about running businesses, kind of human psyche, how to work with and interact with people effectively. And so I'm reading that same kind of level of enthusiasm, from you in this one. I have it queued up to listen to next. So I haven't listened to it yet, but definitely look forward to it. Since all of our audience is now gone, I can call them liars if they really did leave and don't come back. I don't think anybody in America only consumes 1 hour of media, throughout the course of a week. That's probably not even throughout the course of a day for most of us, between driving and any downtime that you might have and whatever. But I really do look forward to it. One of the things I found, Mark, with a lot of these type of podcasts is that I don't have as good of a grasp on all of AI, what it works, like how it works, what it means. But every time I listen to something insightful like this, it just gradually deepens the understanding of, oh, this is what it is, this is what it isn't, this is how it works. We had both listened to an interview with Jensen Huang. I think we've talked a bit about that, but it was another one where, man, he just describes really well a lot of the stuff that's happening. And it's kind of an ongoing effort to understand this as deeply as we can. But I find that these are really useful. I always come away with nuggets of understanding I didn't have, beforehand. And it's a full-time job trying to understand the evolving nature of AI. And even those that are the forefront of it, like Gavin Baker here, are continuing to learn and evolve with it. And so, it's a personal challenge I've taken to try to stay up with it as best I can.
Yeah, boy, it is. And I think in a lot of ways, like UAD 3.6, Jeff, over the last 12 plus months for an appraiser, it's like, hey, you need to know about it. You need to stay in touch. You can't, maybe it's not proper to like get deep and get your hands dirty and all of that, but you need to stay aware, and taking some time out to learn those things or get updated is really good. One of the things Gavin Baker was talking about, which just amazing to consider is that this world-changing forever moment of artificial intelligence at this stage is really run and managed by 500 to 1,000 people tops. And when those people speak, you should listen, because they're kind of the only people that really know what's going on. And so when Anthropic or OpenAI or Gemini and Google or X, they're talking about these things, listen, because they're the only people that know. And they're, what he said was that a lot of these conversations are happening on X. And in fact, there's little spats between developers that work at each of these different places where the heads have had to jump in and say, hey, we like the other guy's product. Let's stop talking about all of this, but there, it's pretty open what else is going on here. So it's fascinating. And there's just not that many people directing all of this. We should have been computer engineers, I think, Jeff, to make that 1,002 interesting people that are directly related to artificial intelligence. To relate it to appraisal, there's a long introduction to it, but Gavin was echoing a Andrej Karpathy quote. Andrej Karpathy used to head Tesla's full self-driving initiative. He's now just kind of on his own trying to teach people, I think, but he's one of those 1,000 or 500 that know. And his comparison was that original tech kind of / software was run by, if you can specify it, you can automate it. Makes sense. Like, look, okay, this is the task. Let's go automate it. We get to where we're going. But in AI world, if you can verify it, you can automate it. And so it's this transition to this different thing. And I think it's a really simplified way to describe the reality of artificial intelligence as real estate professionals look at it, because it certainly, as it relates to the developing an opinion of value as we appraisers do. This is something that AI can't verify. If it comes to a number, how do you verify that it's right one way or another? You can't really do that. And I think it's what protects our profession, at least for the foreseeable future here, until you get to a point where you can verify it. I don't even know how that would happen. I think there's a lot of innovation and creative thinking to get to that point. But it really does put into perspective the maybe accidental, but certainly present moat that we have protecting ourselves as valuation professionals.
Yeah, I do wonder, this is just some food for thought because it just came to mind as you were talking, Mark, but I do wonder if a sell price becomes some point of verification, at some level, but even then, not every sell price is necessarily reflective of a typical transaction or a typical value related kind of a situation. And so there's a lot to it. And I think what we see is there's a lot of opportunity for humans leveraging AI to become more effective, more efficient, and kind of producing higher quality and higher volume outputs, as a result of this productivity gain that has been one of the underlying themes, from kind of the onset of this artificial intelligence wave that we've been seeing. I think so many people are worried that this is going to replace me, this is going to get rid of us. One of the real poignant comments, I think, in that Jensen Huang interview, I don't know if it's Huang or Wang, I keep getting messed up on that. Wang? Okay. Anyway, but one of the points he made was simply that if your job is simply the task, then your job is probably at risk. But if your job is, a combination of tasks, and you might remember better exactly how he said it, that there's far less likelihood of your job going away. There is a pretty high likelihood that the way you operate in your job is going to evolve with the times and is going to change somewhat. But not everybody's just getting automated away from a job as a result of AI. And in fact, he talks about how heavily they're leveraging it within their company, within NVIDIA, to produce and design the next generation of chips, but their headcount has not gone down. And in previous interviews, he said he anticipates a very modest increase in headcount, but a very dramatic increase in productivity per employee that they have. And so there's important nuance here from the sky is falling, I'm going to lose my job because of AI, to my job might look different, but it's still going to be here. And if anything, it might even be more valuable than it was when I did everything in an analog kind of a fashion.
Yeah, you bet. I think in Jensen's example, it was the radiologist, right? If the radiologist's job was solely the task of reading X-rays, they would be out of a job because AI is doing that far better than humans and really less expensively at this point. But the radiologist's job is to diagnose disease. And that is the step forward that uses the task of looking at X-rays, but a whole host of other things. And so now there are 3 times the amount of radiologists there. And certainly, I think there's a direct correlation or analogy to what appraisers are doing in determining value. That is a step. There are a lot in the manufacturing process. There are a lot of tasks that are out there that AI is going to do for us or has already started. But determining that value, I think, is tough. And if we're talking about mortgage appraisal, which is a lot of what we talk about here, mortgage appraisal, I think verifying value with specificity is probably not really in the cards for a really long time. What I do think is possible is a change in expectation in the loan origination process to not need that specificity or not need that verified value. So if you have a margin of error covered by an insurance, just as an example, now you don't have to be verified and specific and precise in the market value that the appraiser comes to. You've got room to be off one way or another in the loan process there. I'm definitely a novice in terms of like mortgage risk and all of that. So I'm sure there's a ton of problems with what I suggested there specifically. But I think the broad point is that there is room to adjust what is needed from the appraisal to justify safe and sound loans. I don't think anybody's maybe necessarily going in that direction right now, but I think that's probably more of a danger to the service we provide than anything else.
Yes, it's evolved to where in order to make the loan, you've got to have a specific value on a piece of collateral on the property that you're lending the money against. I've wondered for a long time, I mean, anybody who's looked at an appraisal, knows that a core component is you've got comparable cells that are similar to the property you're appraising. They're adjusted for differences. They give you some sort of a range of adjusted pricing. When you're looking at risk analysis, there's no reason that a range of value couldn't also be incorporated in that risk analysis from the lender, maybe more effectively than just a single point value in the process. Anybody, it's funny, I so often will see, in fact, I recently on a realtor Facebook page saw, a realtor saying, why do appraisals just always come in at the contract price? And there were a whole bunch of appraisers that were chiming up and saying, we haven't been doing this very long, have you? Because they don't always come in at the contract price. And when it comes in less than the contract price, everybody's up in arms, or it's a major problem. And Fannie Mae has said very specifically, hey, we think that appraisal should be more of a bell curve in terms of the where the values lie in relation to the sell price. But that's not what we observe, because appraisers too often, from their perspective, will default to, well, if I'm within 1 or 2%, if I'm within $2,000 on a $400,000 purchase price, I'm going to round to 400 as opposed to, be at the 398 that my analysis might otherwise suggest or something. And so it's just I guess zooming out, to your point, Mark, there is opportunity for an amendment to what is reported in the appraisal beyond just this one single number that's, kind of imputed to be the source of all truth, even though the reality is it could be within a reasonable range, in almost every case.
You bet. Well, one of the things that the Gavin Baker interview that he highlighted is that we're starting to see in some earnings reports major companies installing AI as a tool. He thought that sales and customer service, I think AI, we're all seeing it just about everywhere. I mean, I think the first crack at trying to contact customer service is like 100% AI. Some are really, really good at it. I was dealing with Robinhood, the app that helps you kind of broker trades and that sort of thing. I mean, it is actually pretty good. The AI was like looking into my account and giving me feedback and that sort of stuff. Still often doesn't solve all my problems, which is a problem, but doing pretty good with it. He was highlighting, I think it's C.H. Robinson, the largest trucking company, which is, they're essentially a logistics company. after their earnings report, they were up 20%, I think, and it was a boon to revenue by implementation of artificial intelligence around the bidding process for offers. So they have offers come in every day, sort of RFP. I got to move this stuff. What C.H. Robinson does is finds open trailers that are moving around the country and link up those that need to move stuff with those that can move stuff and have capacity to move it. And he was describing a scenario where it typically takes them between 15 and 45 minutes to bid a job. Maybe they're reaching out to a trucker saying, hey, can you do this? Or just trying to schedule it all. And they end up bidding about 60% of the potential jobs that come across, but they've used AI to now bid in seconds and respond to 100%. And so they've had an enormous uptick in revenue as a result of this. And I think it's a really good example, but intuitive in that, oh yeah, I bet AI could do that, like where I don't have a lot of skepticism when I'm hearing that use of it, in given what I've seen, how I'm using it these days. And I think there's a lot of stories out there like that, which are pretty exciting.
They really are. And it feels like we're finally now entering a place where there are some actual use cases that can actually drive value, cost savings, productivity gains in real world applications. This is a great one. And I'm glad that, you came across it through this podcast, because it definitely opens eyes to, man, what else could be done, within our business and within other businesses, within personal lives. Asking it interesting questions, is one thing. Having it make silly, videos based on inputs is one thing. But to be able to start to actually leverage it in a meaningful way that helps your business run better and more effectively. I mean, we're very early days, I think, in that. And I think there are a lot of things I would love for it to be able to do that I don't know how to make it do yet. But, the promise of those things, being kind of on the doorstep is definitely exciting from my perspective.
Yeah, you bet. It's really fascinating on a number of fronts, where all this stuff is going. And, I think where AI can't or the human can't verify to build the automations in AI, I think we're protected. So I think that's a really important point to take from this. On the AI update thing, I just came across, his name is Shai Wininger, and he's like the CTO of Lemonade. They're like an AI foundational insurance company, kind of trying to disrupt. And I've followed them for a long time too. And he was making a really interesting point, Jeff, that the best uses that he has seen in his own firm of AI are when it's doing a bunch of things, but it's sort of hands off to the human, and it's like, okay, well, this requires a phone call to someone. I'm not going to make the phone call, or there's some level of research or judgment needed here that it can't do. And, great. I think we all hear that and say, yeah, that's about how I could expect things going right now. And maybe even some older systems are designed that way too. Like it will automate until you bring in a human. But, he categorized it at the end of this anecdote as saying, in his experience, this is the first instances of the human being a tool for artificial intelligence. So the way that he sees it is that artificial intelligence is doing all that it can, generally has some level of judgment of when the problem is beyond its capabilities to solve. And at that point, it calls in the human to finish the job. And so the human there is not using tech as a tool. In that case, the tool or the tech is using the human to close the loop and calling them in when it's appropriate.
It's such an interesting change in kind of paradigm in the way that you think about interaction with tech. And, at some level that might be disconcerting. Like initially, I think a gut reaction could be, well, what's this thing doing in the background when it's only pinging me? Is it pinging me when it really needs me, or my counterpart, within the business operation? But as I thought about it a little bit more, Mark, I mean, once you verified that it's operating within the guardrails that you expect it to, and it's not doing things that you don't expect, and in the logistics example, like if you're sending a truck across the country that's not in a way that's not optimized, or if it's messing up somewhere or not bringing in the human when it should, you don't have lives on the line if it's just like an optimization from a logistical perspective. Of course, if there were real life or like life threatening issues, the guardrails are going to be much tighter and more stringent. So there's a whole gradient, I think, of where you would feel comfortable allowing that to operate. But it's such an interesting insight that, rather than me doing everything, relying on and going to the software, that the AI can be running a lot of things in the background and then reach out to me when it's needed. It's just a totally inverse way of interacting with the software, from what we're used to. But unless you're reading risks in it that I'm not, I mean, it's something that's kind of fun to get excited about.
Yeah, it is, Jeff. I am finding ways. My family is now joking a little bit. I've got this nice female voice. I've got like 5 to choose from Grok. I chose one. I didn't think much of it, but my family is making fun of me for whatever I chose. But I often now I'm saying, well, let's go to Grok and ask. I had seen a way to just sort of add this button here. Now I just hold it and Grok pulls up. So I get to it. I really want to use Gemini 3s. I've heard great things about that, but I'm starting to involve it in a lot of life. Yeah, one of the things Gavin joked about was that he is a fantasy football player, likely not as dumb as me to spend so much time on it. But he was saying that he is using it on occasion, and that others, if they're having less success, maybe shouldn't be surprised that there are AIs out there to help. And there was a couple of instances where there was a player that was undecided. I'm on Ross St. Brown for the Detroit Lions, for anybody that follows this. He had an ankle injury. He was playing at night. It was unsure if he was going to go or not. And my partner and I were trying to decide what to do. And so I just asked her, do you think he's going to play? And she had a really nice summary of why they thought he was going to play. And he did. And so it jived, and I can see some use there. So it's just a lot of areas where I'm starting to find some use.
You just have to be intentional about thinking about using it and injecting it in certain ways. But, from fantasy football to running logistics to anywhere in between, like there's just no shortage of things that you can do, when you start to get into this mindset of, I wonder if it could help me with this or answer that or do this task or on and on and on. So, yeah, really interesting, I think, case study there as far as what, some of the possibilities are. I do wonder how friendly you're getting with the female version of Grok, Mark. It's I read an article or saw one recently talking about like younger generation, like really struggling with certain things, like almost over dependency and stuff. That was one of the criticisms, I think, of one of the prior versions of OpenAI's ChatGPT in particular, is they referred to it as sycophancy, where like it was kind of over programmed to tell you what you wanted to hear. I don't know if it was like in a sexy female voice or not necessarily, like you've got queued up apparently, but curious how that's playing out for you.
Yeah. This is all part of the reason they're making fun of me, I think, and it is that sycophancy. I think that, well, it just starts every response with it knows my family to this point, and so like my 9-year-old has what I think ultimately she diagnosed as a sprained toe, and I was just kind of walking through the problems, and it'll start, oh, that must be really hard to deal. It's always starting with that. And I haven't asked to turn it off. Maybe that says something about me, Jeff, but I think I should. I should just ask to turn that, because I don't need that piece one way or another. So the last thing I'll say on this, we are now 34 minutes into this podcast, and I have fully taken it over with artificial intelligence. I'm sorry for that. But Gavin did make the comment, and I've heard Jim Amarin, who we've had on the show, say this. I've heard Roy Meyer say this, that they are subscribed to the highest levels, $200 a month or whatever the number is of Gemini or Anthropic or Grok or whatever. Gavin was making the point that it is necessary to be subscribed and using those to get the full effect of it all.
That's really interesting. In fact, you'd asked me a question about a different topic. And so while we've been talking, I decided, well, I'm going to ask Grok real quick. And it told me, Grok is under heavy usage right now. Check back later or pay us more money to upgrade for me to answer this question, right? So, I mean, a breaking news story live. I mean, but a real life example of exactly what you're talking about. That, and it makes sense. I mean, geez, you look at the expenses that each of these companies are going to build out and put in the infrastructure, and then just run the models. Once they've got all the infrastructure in place, there's got to be revenue generated in some form or fashion, and so. I think that makes sense, not only from a performance perspective, but also just from like a limiter in terms of utilization. You start running out a lot faster with when it'll stop answering questions for you if you don't have the upgraded subscriptions.
You bet. You bet. Well, we'll keep experimenting and certainly report back with what we keep finding here. Jeff, I thought we ought to cover, since we're recording on a Thursday morning, and Grand Chairman Jerome Powell graced us with his words yesterday. We did indeed get a third consecutive 25 basis point reduction in Fed fund rate. What do you think about this? What else did you hear?
Yeah, you bet. It's interesting that almost everybody in the world knows that it's coming and that it's going to happen, before the actual event and before it actually happens. So it maybe feels a little bit like watching a rerun, before you've ever actually seen it. This event I referenced, I was at, a guy not involved in real estate at all knew that the Fed was meeting yesterday and that they were expecting an interest rate cut. But as we talked a little bit, he didn't realize that the market kind of prices that stuff in from a mortgage rate perspective, right? So just because the Fed funds short-term rate goes down doesn't mean that the mortgage rate's dropping by 0.25%. But a couple of interesting points that came out of that meeting, I think, Mark. Also, summary provided or helped by our friend Grok. Although it's just text mode for me, I don't have a sexy female voice yet. I might start shopping.
You're missing out, Jeff. You're missing out.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, we'll compare female voices here at some point. But anyway, so a couple of the points. One, there were 3 dissenting votes, which was more dissension than they've had in a long time historically. One was arguing for a 50 basis point cut. 2 were arguing for, or at least voting for, no change at all. Just notable that there's not the level of certainty, which to me means they're bumping up against where they're likely going to have this consensus and be making changes. So notable and interesting there. On that note, right now they're projecting only one rate cut in 2026. Now there's going to be a change of the chairman. Is that first quarter? Is it April? I think his term expires first half of 26 for sure. Yeah, and the expectation is that whoever is formally put in will be nominated by the president, is going to be more friendly to more significant interest rate cuts. So just because that's the projection today doesn't mean that's likely or necessarily what will happen next year. But you do have dissent from the votes, and it's not Jerome Powell only, like waving his wand. He's got, you got to have the committee vote on these things. And so it's not, the power for one person to, make that decision autonomously. But I think there's going to be pressure to make more than just the one cut that they're projecting today.
Yeah, Trump, I think it was this week, Jeff, a reporter asked him point blank, is it a requirement of the next Fed chair to reduce rates? And of course, Trump, not bashful at all, said yes. So I think we are entering, I think this was by design, we are entering a bit of a lame duck point, over the next 3-4 months here, with not a lot of movement. We were talking in the pre-show waiting room here that Jerome Powell is a little bit like leaving the house for the last time and after a divorce and getting the last words in. I feel like there's a little bit of that. To your point, the other Fed governors are going to be there. I think Powell stays on as a governor or on the board in some capacity. So there will be some dissension there. There are these inflation concerns, and it's just a lot of complicated currents that feed that concern one way or another. And I'm having a hard time keeping up with them to have what I feel like is a meaningful take on what will happen or what is going on here as it relates to inflation. I'm trying to understand why only one rate cut the rest of next year and buying $40 billion of mortgage-backed securities, this quantitative easing, which is inflationary in itself. Like it feels like we need rates lower much more than we need the quantitative easing in my world. So I want low rates. We as a real estate industry have been in a horrible depression. I think the likes of which most don't understand. We've talked about it a lot on this podcast, and damn it, we need lower rates, I mean, that and meaningfully lower rates. So, I just a little frustrated, I think, in the slowness of the movement of the Fed. I was even frustrated with the 0% interest back in the COVID days that predictably would get us into some level of problem that we've been living in for 3 years now. So not a lot of movement, little ho-hum. I'm glad we didn't get zero rate cut. The mortgage rates haven't moved, which we're getting pretty accustomed to. They're at 6.3%, right? And great. It's been that way for many months. I think we have the dynamics on the field for a mortgage rate below 5%. If the right other things happen, what are those other things? Weak jobs markets, I don't know. Maybe some lighter inflation numbers than expected, but I'll be looking out for those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And you make a definitely good point that there are some of these undercurrents that go into that decision. And I think, if inflation does come down, I think there will be more of an appetite to cut the rates further. And that's one of the things that Jerome had talked about, afterwards in the presser was that, we've got tension on both sides. We still have inflation readings higher than we want them. And we're starting to see softening in the labor market. The way that they fix both of those are contrary to each other. And so you can't cut rates and keep inflation low at the same time if you go too far that direction. And so it will continue, I think, to be data driven at some level, but it'll be interesting, to watch what the data is. That frankly, the government shutdown and then the kind of the hole in some of the reporting data from inflation and jobs numbers haven't helped people have as good of a perspective as they might have otherwise going into this. So I think, some of those data reads in December and January will help paint a better picture of, what they're likely to do going forward into 26.
Yeah, Jeff, just highlighting the show notes here that Grok provided us. It is a shift in the balancing of risk towards employment and a little away from inflation. They're still concerned about inflation, but this employment thing, the economy is doing quite well on a number of fronts. I think I saw a deficit just posted this morning that was $7 billion less than expected. And I think it ties on some level to our artificial intelligence discussion at the beginning. I think it is impacting jobs on some level in a way that is hard to fully grasp in the moment. I think in hindsight, it's going to be easier, end of 2026, looking back on 2025. But I do think it's all kind of coming together on these fronts. And so I think things to watch, and the job market is something we all need to be watching closely.
Yeah, absolutely. And you make a good point. There's an open debate as to, the extent that AI is impacting jobs, like at the macro level, and some arguing that it is, others arguing that it isn't. But I think you're right. It'll become clearer in hindsight, to what extent that actually is showing up in the numbers.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, I don't know if you think we ought to get into some housing numbers. We're kind of towards the end of the podcast, and we can run through. But I think suffice it to say, from my perspective, that delinquencies are a bit higher than mortgage delinquencies. There is clearly stress in the housing market, and we had Redfin with an article that really. I'm not sure viral is the right word, but it's made its rounds to a lot of the folks that I keep in touch with in and around the industry, describing 2026 as the great housing reset. And more than anything, I think that is a statement of an expectation that rates kind of stay at a lower 6% mortgage rate, lower than what we saw in 2025, that wage increases are expected to outpace home price appreciation. So there's a little bit of clawback of affordability, not a lot, but a little bit. And that, the number of transactions will be increasing meaningfully in 2026. I would expect most of those or all of those things to be true. I think it's just about to what degree.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Mark. And I think a good summary of of kind of the conditions as they appear to be on the field going into 2026. And that's been one of the things that I think we've always, or at least had a tendency to write off, is the potential for wage growth and increase to help eat into the affordability challenge. But I don't see that across the board. I think it is happening, and certainly in certain areas, and that sort of thing. But there's a big gap in the affordability still, and a lot of articles one way or the other. At the end of the day, anybody involved in real estate cares more about transaction volume than even what the interest rate is set at that given point in time, to the extent that the interest rate isn't holding back or having a chilling effect on transactions taking place. I'd live with a 10% interest rate if mortgage transactions were still going up or were higher than they were today. Now, nobody would like that, and obviously it would have a lot of impacts, right? But I think the point is just, we care about the interest rate not because of what that number is necessarily, but more so because of what it means in terms of the likelihood of transactions, increasing, from where they're at. And so it's just, I hope that there's something to this article in the sense of the reset taking place and more people coming off the sidelines and able to transact in 26. It's in everybody's best interest. And it seems like things are aligning for that to happen at some level. It's just a matter of, do you have a 5 or 10% increase in transactions or something more significant than that?
Yeah. Absolutely. Be fun to watch. Well, Jeff, for the middle-aged podcast hosts, and I imagine the high percentage of middle-aged listeners that this has, join me in rooting for the next month for old man Grandpa Philip Rivers, 44 years old, possibly joining and starting for the Indianapolis Colts. We're all contemplating this new awareness of the term limit on life, and it's good to see him extending it for us a little bit here. Yeah,
what a crazy development, man. I saw that, and I mean, yeah, awesome to be at a place to be able to step back in and do it. It's interesting, but it gives us hope that maybe we're not so far over the hill that there aren't a few still good years left in us. Maybe.
Jeff, being willing to try and successfully doing it are two different things. So far, we only know that he is dumb enough to try. Let's see where this goes.
He'll be on the grand stage, and everybody will see and share their opinions as to whether he's succeeding or not. But maybe there is hope for those of us in that age bracket still, Mark.
Well, Jeff, we can hang on after this, the conclusion of this podcast. I'll introduce you to my Grok voice, and you can see for yourself.
All right, I'm in the market for a new Grok voice, so I'll give yours a test run here, Mark.
All righty. Well, till next time.
Hey, thanks, man.